There's a sound that used to roll across American highways, a deep, crackling, mechanical roar, so distinct that truckers could name the engine making it without ever seeing the truck. You'd feel it in your chest before you heard it with your ears. That sound belonged to Caterpillar, and in 2008, one of the most dominant engine manufacturers in the history of American trucking announced it was walking away from highway truck engines, not scaling back, not restructuring, leaving forever. Here's the part that makes no sense at first. When Cat left, their engines were still beloved, truckers were still buying them, the loyalty was still there. So why would a company abandon a market it practically owned? The answer involves a federal investigation, a $150,000 gamble under every hood, and a bet on unproven technology that went catastrophically wrong at the worst possible moment. To understand why Caterpillar leaving hurt so much, you have to understand how dominant they were. This wasn't a manufacturer doing okay that quietly moved on. This was a company that had built something close to a religion inside the trucking community. Through the 1980s and 1990s, Caterpillar produced some of the most respected diesel engines ever bolted into a highway truck: the C10, the C12, the C15, and the monstrous C16. These weren't just engines, they were identities. Owner-operators chose their entire truck around which Cat engine they could get. Fleet managers built maintenance schedules around Cat parts. Mechanics built entire careers on knowing these engines inside and out. That's not a product, that's a culture. The C15 in particular became legendary, and honestly, that might be underselling it. It came in configurations from 435 all the way up to 600 horsepower, with a torque curve truckers described like it was alive. It didn't just pull, it pulled with confidence. Smooth, relentless, seemingly unstoppable, and the durability was almost unmatched. Stories circulated of C15s clocking over 1 million miles and still running strong. 1 million miles. That's roughly the distance from the Earth to the Moon and back. Twice. From a lump of iron and steel burning diesel fuel under a hood. Then there was the sound. A deep, aggressive exhaust note completely unlike anything Cummins or Detroit Diesel produced. Truckers didn't like it. They loved it. Some will still tell you today with complete sincerity that no engine ever built sounded quite like a well-tuned Cat at full throttle on an open highway. That's the kind of loyalty you can't buy with a marketing campaign. It takes decades to earn. So with all of that, the reputation, the performance, the culture, the sound, how did it all fall apart? The answer starts with 3 letters: EPA. In the late 1990s, the Environmental Protection Agency began pushing hard for dramatically cleaner diesel emissions from heavy-duty trucks. Diesel had always been dirty. That thick black smoke rolling out of an exhaust stack was practically part of a big truck's character. Regulators decided that era was over. 2 targets: nitrogen oxides, NOx, the combustion gases that drive smog, and particulate matter, the black soot pouring out of older diesel stacks at full throttle. The EPA laid out a roadmap, hit specific targets by 2002, then hit dramatically stricter ones by 2007. And you need to appreciate the scale of what was being asked. The 2007 standards required NOx emissions to drop by roughly 90%. 90%. That's not an adjustment. That's not a tune-up. That's a fundamental ground-up rethinking of how a diesel engine manages combustion. Every major American engine manufacturer was staring down the same challenge at the same time. Cummins, Detroit Diesel, Mack, Volvo. Nobody had an easy answer. Nobody had a proven solution sitting on a shelf. But the way each manufacturer chose to attack the problem, that's where the story turns. Because they didn't all make the same choice, and the path Caterpillar picked would cost them everything they'd built on the highway. The technology the EPA effectively pushed the industry toward was called exhaust gas recirculation, EGR. The idea is simple. Take a portion of the exhaust the engine already burned and route it back into the intake to be burned again. That lowers peak combustion temperature, and lower temperatures produce less NOx. Simple in theory, brutal in practice. When you feed hot, dirty exhaust back into the intake, you're cutting into the clean, oxygen-rich air the engine needs. And for a diesel, oxygen is everything. Less oxygen means less efficient combustion, more heat, more stress on components, and often worse fuel economy. You're essentially asking the engine to breathe its own exhaust. And engines, like people, don't particularly enjoy that. Caterpillar looked at EGR and didn't like what they saw. Their engineers worried about long-term reliability, heat management, and what it would do to the durability reputation they'd spent decades building, so they made a bold decision. Skip EGR entirely. Build their own alternative. They called it Acert, Advanced Combustion Emissions Reduction Technology. Multiple fuel injections per combustion cycle, improved air management, sophisticated after-treatment. On paper, it sounded brilliant. In practice, it was a nightmare. Early Acert engines struggled with reliability problems that devastated CAT's reputation at exactly the wrong moment. Trucks came back to dealers with issues. Owner-operators who had built their livelihoods on CAT dependability were suddenly seeing failures they'd never experienced. And in trucking, reliability is everything. You can forgive a lot of things. You cannot forgive an engine that leaves you on the side of a highway with a full load and a deadline. Here's where it gets messier. Because before Acert ever played out, Caterpillar was already in serious legal trouble. In 1998, the EPA discovered that several major diesel manufacturers, Caterpillar among them, had been using defeat devices, software strategies that let engines detect when they were being emissions tested and temporarily switch into a cleaner mode. On the road under normal conditions, the engines produced far more NOx than allowed. On the test cycle, they looked perfectly clean. When it came to light, it was a massive scandal. Caterpillar and the other manufacturers signed a consent decree with the EPA and the Department of Justice, one of the largest environmental enforcement actions in American history at the time. For CAT, it meant hundreds of millions of dollars in penalties and compliance costs, and a strict, legally binding timeline for meeting the 2002 standards with almost no room for error. So Caterpillar entered the toughest regulatory decade in trucking history, already financially bruised, already under a federal microscope, and betting everything on an unproven technology. Then came 2007, the 90% NOx reduction, plus strict new particulate limits requiring a new piece of hardware bolted to every exhaust system, the diesel particulate filter. Look at what Cummins and Detroit Diesel did. They swallowed their pride, accepted EGR, engineered around its problems, and paired it with the new after-treatment systems. Their 2007 engines weren't perfect, but they were fundamentally reliable. They stayed in the game. Caterpillar had already poured enormous resources into Acert. Now they faced a choice: double down and engineer an entirely new compliance system around it, or pivot to EGR at the last minute. Either path meant extraordinary cost, years of development, and an engine less proven than what their reputation demanded. And here's the thing almost everyone misses about this story. By 2007, highway truck engines weren't even Caterpillar's main business. Not close. Caterpillar is one of the largest equipment manufacturers on the planet. Those yellow machines are on construction sites, mines, and oil fields in virtually every country on Earth. Their industrial and marine engines power generators, ships, and drilling platforms across dozens of industries. Highway truck engines, for all their cultural weight, were a small slice of total revenue, a slice getting more expensive, more regulated, and more risky every year. When CAT's leadership ran the numbers, the cost of 2007 compliance, the reputational damage from Acert, the legal risk of getting it wrong again under a consent decree, the math simply didn't work. Those resources could go to mining and construction engines, where CAT already dominated, so in 2008 they made it official. Caterpillar was exiting the on-highway truck engine market. By 2010, the last engines were gone. No more C-15s, no more C-16s, no more of that sound. From a pure business standpoint, it's hard to argue with. But try telling that to someone who's run a CAT-powered Peterbilt for 20 years. Because this wasn't just about an engine. It was about an identity. The used market for pre-emissions, CAT-powered trucks exploded almost immediately, and it never came back down. Right now, today, owner-operators actively hunt for well-maintained C-15 trucks. They rebuild them. They maintain them obsessively. Some put entirely new bodies on old frames just to keep that engine alive. A whole culture, glider kits, rebuilt pre-emissions powertrains, exists in significant part because of people who refuse to give up on their CAT. And that's what makes this story unusual. Caterpillar didn't lose its customers' trust. The trust was fully intact when they left. The regulations and the business math took them out of the market while truckers still loved them, which somehow makes it hurt more. Could they ever come back? It comes up at truck stops and in trucking forums every few years. CAT has never completely slammed the door, but Cummins, Detroit, and Packer have spent nearly 2 decades filling the space CAT left, and the market is now drifting toward electric and alternative powertrains, which creates a whole new equation. A comeback in traditional diesel highway engines is unlikely. And a battery-powered CAT with that exhaust note? It's not quite the same, is it? So Caterpillar didn't leave because they ran out of ideas, and they didn't leave because their engines weren't good enough. They left because a perfect storm, regulatory pressure, a failed bet on unproven technology, federal legal trouble, and cold business math all converge at exactly the same moment. What was lost can't be measured in revenue or market share. It was a sound, a culture, a loyalty built over decades, and parts of the trucking world are still mourning it today. If you've ever driven a CAT-powered truck, or you know someone who still swears by one, tell us about it in the comments. And if you learned something today most people never knew, subscribe. There's a lot more on this channel that'll change the way you look at the trucks on the road around you.